And once again, we have all gathered in Armenia, friends. You are once again a guest of the Armenian woman. Today we have this gorgeous Armenian baklava. Just look at this beauty. Even though it seems like a complicated process, in reality it's actually quite simple and easy. The main thing is to know the important nuances which I will share with you today. Be sure to watch until the end. I have a lot of useful information for you. We will need 4 eggs, about 55 grams each, without the shell, which is medium size. Now, let's separate the whites from the yolks. 3 yolks will go into the dough, 1 yolk will save for brushing the dough at the end, and all the whites, that is 4 egg whites, will go into the filling. To the 3 yolks, add a pack of margarine or butter, 250 grams. Of course, it's always better to use butter. Add a pinch of salt. Now mix them together, trying to make the butter as smooth as possible. It might not become completely smooth, but my butter is soft and at room temperature. This is done so that the butter will mix much more easily with all the other ingredients later. We've got a more or less uniform mixture. At least there aren't any large chunks of butter left. Add 300 grams of sour cream. It shouldn't be very cold. The fat content can be any. Sometimes I also substitute part of it with matsoni or combine them, depending. It depends on what I have left in the fridge and what is convenient for me to use. But still, it's preferable that most of it is sour cream. If you're not working with gloves, you can also do this step with a whisk. Now we start adding the flour. With the first portion, add a scant teaspoon of baking soda. As always, I weighed the flour in advance, and at the end I'll tell you, or as usual, I'll write it under the video, exactly how much was used. At the end, I can't work with gloves anymore, friends. I need to feel the dough. You shouldn't knead this dough for too long if you want the layers to turn out loose and very tender. As always, the detailed recipe will be under the video. As soon as you feel with your hand that the dough is uniform or more or less uniform, stop this process. Look, when you knead the dough and press too hard, it will seem like the butter is sticking to your hands and to the surface as well. And because of this, you'll have to keep adding more and more flour. That's why we try to work like this. The dough's tenderness. Don't press too hard. Just like that. And if necessary, of course, add more flour. How could we do without it? This way you'll need much less flour. This is the kind of dough we end up with. It's not completely uniform on the surface. That's perfectly fine. It's so soft, very tender, like modeling clay. If your room is warm, you might need more flour. The dough may require more and more flour. But as I already mentioned, we work with the dough very gently so it doesn't stick too much and so we don't end up adding too much flour. Divide the dough into 4 parts. One part should be a bit larger than the others. And let it rest for about 30 minutes. If the room isn't too warm or too hot, you can leave it on the table. But if, on the contrary, then put it in the fridge. Let's prepare the filling. I've washed the nuts. I don't leave them in water for long. I just wash them thoroughly and then send them to dry in the oven. I leave them at a temperature of 60 to 70 degrees until they're completely dry. You can chop them in a blender, with a knife, or with a rolling pin, whatever is convenient for you. The pieces shouldn't be too large, but it's also not desirable to make them too small. I ground part of them in the blender. Try to make sure they're not too finely chopped. Add 2.5 cups of sugar. There should be a lot of sugar, but not too much. No more than necessary, because otherwise the baklava will turn out hard. But there shouldn't be too little either. Add the egg whites that we set aside earlier. The mixture should have the texture of wet sand. If there isn't enough egg white, add one more. You can add a little cinnamon to taste here and a bit of nutmeg too, but just a tiny amount. This is all up to your taste. I'll just add a little cinnamon, that's all, so the flavor is subtle. It turned out to be about half a teaspoon. I still felt the filling wasn't moist enough, so I'll add a bit more egg white. I'll be assembling it in a 30 by 40 centimeter pan. Even though the dough doesn't stick to the table, I still dust the surface with flour so the dough opens up much more easily and evenly. By eye, divide the filling into 3 equal parts and spread one part over the first layer. Spread the filling in an even layer. I do this with damp fingers, it's easier that way. The dough is very manageable, it's very easy and simple to work with. Spread a portion of the filling on this layer as well. While spreading the filling, I intentionally press down on it slightly like this so that the dough kind of merges with the filling. This also affects the aesthetics of the cut. Our layers won't be felt separately, they won't be very visible. Instead, they'll look more like a single whole, all the layers together. For some reason, I really like it this way. Of course, it's not necessary, but it looks very beautiful. Now, roll out the last layer and don't forget, friends, just like the very first bottom layer, the very top layer should also be a bit thicker than the ones in the middle. First, it looks nice, and second, it gives our pastry more stability. If you're wondering why I spread the filling like this, not all the way to the edges, know that I did it on purpose because the edges will come out anyway, and this way the slices look prettier. That's why I didn't want to waste filling on those parts. That's all there is to it. Now fold the edges under the first layer like this. Everything turns out very neat and beautiful. Or you can simply pinch the edges together to seal them, and that's it. That way everything... In the process, we ended up with 2 egg yolks. I add a little milk to them. You don't have to do this, but I just like the color better this way. And we brush the surface with this egg yolk mixture. The shine is also much better with milk. You know, friends, whenever I post a recipe from our Armenian cuisine and mention it, there are always some outraged people who insist that it's not true, that we don't have our own cuisine, that we've stolen it from other nations. But my friends, our people are no less than 4,500 years old. Over all this time, we have created our own culture, and cuisine is a part of that culture. Now let's shape it. There are several different ways to do this. Sometimes the dough is cut almost all the way through, down to the very bottom layer. But I don't like this method and don't recommend it because the filling can turn out dry. There is another method where the last layer is left almost untouched. You simply use the back of a knife to mark lines indicating where the finished baklava will be cut. In such cases, you simply make several small holes using either a toothpick or the sharp pointed tip of a knife so that steam can escape, and the pastry does not get deformed. But with the diamond-shaped pieces, the top layer is not cut because there's a concern that these pieces of dough might deform or shrink in the oven, and as a result, the baklava would turn out uneven and unattractive. But for us friends, we don't have such problems. Everything is calculated correctly. And since we'll be baking it properly, we can go ahead and pre-cut the diamond shapes. This way, the edges will turn out neater than if we were to cut the finished layer afterward. Right now, I've just marked it, but I'm about to cut through, trying to slice only the top layer. My baking tray measures 30 by 40, and I've made 5 lines like this. I'm cutting along these lines now with the sharp side of the knife, but I'm trying to slice only the very top layer. This is how I do it, take a look. So, not with continuous lines. If you do that, you end up with more scraps, but exactly like this. This way there are very few scraps from the sides. All that's left is to decorate with some nuts. I press them down a little. That's it. We put it into a preheated oven. The temperature should be 160 to 170 degrees. We don't need very high temperatures here. Bake at this temperature for 35 to 40 minutes. Keep an eye on the color of the pastry. Exactly 38 minutes have passed and everything is ready. Now we cut all the way through, leaving only the last layer so that the honey doesn't end up at the bottom later. Now very quickly, while everything is still very hot, pour just a few tablespoons of honey over it. As soon as I took the baklava out, I turned off the oven. And right now it's still very hot, just like this. Put our baklava back into the switched off but still hot oven and leave it for a few minutes until the color changes a little. Work quickly while the oven is still very hot. That's it, and now our delicious baklava is ready. Now we won't touch anything else, we'll leave it for a few hours. During this time, everything will soak up the honey and the juices inside, which have formed, will distribute evenly. I used 6 cups of chopped nuts. That's about 800 grams, friends. That's quite a lot because, first of all, keep in mind that I made the baklava quite tall, and I also had 3 layers of filling. Very often people make it a bit shorter and use 2 layers of filling. In that case, of course, you'll need comparatively less filling. To make just 2 layers of filling, you'll also need a bit less dough. I'll write down that version for you under the video as well. With this method, you'll get the same result, but the baklava will be a bit shorter. And you'll use less filling as well. Let me also answer some questions I've recently received on social media since I did a little survey. So, at what temperature is it best to bake? I don't know why, but many people prefer a high temperature, 190 to 200 degrees, and sometimes I've even seen higher. It's better to set a more moderate temperature, around 160 to 170 degrees. At this temperature, our pastry will have enough time. There will be enough time for everything that needs to happen to finish properly. That is so that all the layers inside bake through as they should. And so that the filling becomes one whole, and so that our baklava turns out really juicy. If you set a high temperature, of course, it might not bake through, and by the way, because of this, your baklava could turn out dry. I promise to tell you why it's necessary to add more egg white. I think I've already answered this question, because inside this filling we need more liquid, more water to get that nice syrup, that juiciness. An egg white consists of albumin and water, and there the water together with the sugar forms a syrup. That's exactly what we need, what we see as a result. And the next question is whether to make meringue. I know there are such options. Which option is better and which is preferable? I still prefer the method I showed you. That is, when all the ingredients for the filling are mixed together and used as is. When you make meringue, it affects both the texture and the cut. Probably it's a personal choice. Everyone picks what they like. There are no right or wrong options here. I personally prefer the method I showed you because both in terms of texture and appearance, it's much better this way. I've tried to answer the most important questions and give the most important recommendations, friends. But if you still have questions, write to me in the comments. I'm always available and always happy to answer.